Repression of demonstrations in Chile draws condemnation on the eve of the COP25 climate summit in Madrid. Dominica PM Roosevelt Scarrett rejects interference in his country's election. And controversy in Spain over a digital security decree. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. Repression of demonstrations in Chile continued into the night in the capital, Santiago. Police launched tear gas to drive out peaceful demonstrators who had gathered at Plaza Italia, which they rechristened Dignity Square. Massive mobilizations calling for the dismantling of the neoliberal state have entered their sixth week. The protesters also demand the resignation of President Sebastián Piñera and the Constituent Assembly to create a new constitution for the country. At least 2,808 people have been hospitalized by police repression. Later, citizens held a vigil for those killed during the demonstrations. Official figures say at least 24 people have died so far. The Santa Maria Clinic has confirmed that 21-year-old student Gustavo Gatica Villarroel has been blinded by a projectile fired by police on November 8th. The number of eye injuries is at least 232, a disproportionately high figure by international standards, sparking concerns of deliberate malpractice on the part of security forces. Now, a general strike was called by Chile's trade unions on Monday and Tuesday. They say the stoppages will continue until the government decides to listen. Our correspondent Leonel Retamal has the latest from Santiago.
The main trade union confederations are reporting a very favourable balance sheet of Tuesday's general strike. They say the protests in the streets kept up their momentum. In fact, they were the biggest protests since the agreement reached in the Congress on November the 15th for a constitutional referendum. The main demands of the protests were an end to the repression and justice for human rights abuses. Only yesterday, the Chilean prosecutor's office said there were more than 2,600 complaints of human rights abuses that are under investigation. Unions say they've had no response from the government to their list of 10 demands, which include an increase in the minimum wage as well as pensions and healthcare. They say they're expecting a meeting this week with the government to discuss these demands. They're also demanding real participation in the drawing up of a new constitution. They think the existing agreement is fundamentally deficient because it doesn't take into account the social movements. Another controversial issue in Chile right now is President Sebastián Piñera's proposal for a law that would give the armed forces control of strategic locations. That includes hospitals, highways, supply depots and power plants, among others. And it also gives legal immunity to members of the armed forces carrying out those duties. During Tuesday's strike, several union leaders said this would not solve Chile's basic problems, which are deep-seated social issues, and that such militarization would only aggravate the violation of human rights. Other leaders said this was a clear sign of the authoritarian path that the government has chosen to take, and that other international experiences have shown that social problems cannot be solved by putting more soldiers and police on the streets. Some members of parliament have also criticized this bill, which the president presented to Congress yesterday for its urgent consideration.
Meanwhile, protesters in Spain have condemned the Chilean government as murderous ahead of the COP25 climate summit. The conference was scheduled to be hosted in Chile, but the event was moved to Madrid. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera was supposed to be in attendance, but hasn't traveled with his country's delegation.
We're here to say that we're not in favor of Spain welcoming the Chilean government and that Chile remains the official host of the COP conference, because this means they're still legitimizing a murderous government, a government that has declared war on its people. What the people have done is nothing more than demonstrate for historic causes that have been ongoing for more than 30 years. It's not about 30 cents, it's about 30 years. The people have been protesting for more than a month. The only response from the government has been repression. We're here with our hands stained with blood, just like the Chilean government today.
Shifting gears now, the persecution of political leaders from the Movement Towards Socialism party continues, despite an agreement for new elections in Bolivia. Police, acting in conjunction with the de facto government installed after the right-wing coup to depose President Evo Morales, arrested Daisy Choque, a former candidate for the MAS party. She was detained while giving an interview at her home. Her lawyer says she is a political prisoner. Our correspondent in La Paz, Freddy Morales, has the latest.
The
Legislative Assembly is set to propose the rules for selecting new members of the Supreme Electoral Court. Last Sunday, the law calling for the designation of these posts was announced. Now the details are going to be discussed. Once approved, the 6 remaining places will be assigned within 20 days. The executive assigned its representative yesterday, and once the details are agreed on, the remaining posts will be filled. The electoral body, comprised of 7 people, will call for national elections. It's been said that the elections could take place in April next year, and this is something that's going to be addressed today. The other is a massive assembly of social organizations in La Paz, which will take place this afternoon in order to evaluate whether agreements made with the de facto government are being complied with. This includes the decree that absolved soldiers and police of all responsibility for violence in the past few weeks, as well as the harm done in repression. Social movements say the government must abide by its commitment to lift the decree, but 48 hours have passed and they're yet to do it. Another is the end of persecution of social and political leaders, because as we've seen, there have been a series of accusations levelled against trade union leaders and former members of the government, which social movements say is with the intention of criminalising them.
That was our correspondent Freddy Morales with that report. Citizens held a vigil for 18-year-old Dylan Cruz, the latest fatality of violent police repression in Colombia. Students from the University of Cartagena laid flowers, candles and posters outside the Piedra de Bolivar campus. Cruz died due to his injuries after he was shot in the head with a gas canister at point-blank range by police in Bogota during demonstrations over the weekend. The students are now demanding an investigation into his death. Teachers, leaders, and other trade unionists are calling for another nationwide strike after meeting with President Ivan Duque. They said the government is still not listening to their demands.
Tomorrow, teachers, students, people from rural areas, indigenous people, social movements, popular movements, the Colombian people, we will be there, and we hope that the President of the Republic will give us a prompt response if he wants a solution.
Coming up after the break, Antigua and Barbuda's PM calls for respect for the UN Charter. Don't go anywhere.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursday, only on FtS.
Welcome back. We return with news from the Caribbean. The Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Scarrett, says the opposition, backed from abroad, is trying to stop elections from taking place on December 6th. He was speaking in an exclusive interview with Telesur's Madeline Garcia.
Well, you know, we are having general elections in our country on December 6th. And there are attempts to derail or to prevent this from happening. And the opposition is seeking to create a situation in the country that would give one the impression that the country is not stable, that there are riots, and there are serious conflicts taking place in the country, and therefore it would appear to the outside world that the country is ungovernable. And therefore that situation would not allow for the holding of elections in our country. Now, the opposition is saying that the reason why they're taking those actions is because there have been no electoral reform in our country. Now, this government, which I have had the honor to lead, has done all what is required to ensure that there is the electoral reform that's required. But the legislation which was required to be passed in the parliament to allow for the reform to be completely effective was blocked by the opposition. So on one hand, they say they support electoral reform, but on the other hand, they are not prepared to support the actions which are required to get the electoral reform in place.
Skerritt went on to accuse the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, of promoting the campaign against his government. He said that was in retaliation for Dominica consistently voting against intervention in the region.
We believe that the Secretary General of the OAS is one such person who has had an issue with Dominica's position at the OAS, you know, and you have seen his tweets, and these are not, the Secretary General of the OAS is supposed to be an independent person, an apolitical person, who is a representative of all of the nations of the OAS. But it is clear by his actions, by his utterances, by his tweets, by his statements, that he has a bias in Dominica, and that bias is against my government. I think he has a program or a strategy of regime change in the OAS, and they're targeting certain member states. Dominica is one such country which they're targeting, and my government is one such government that they're targeting. So it is not about whether there's going to be free and fair elections in Dominica. It is not about the electoral process. They have waited for this opportunity to implement the strategy. So it is something that has been in the making for 3-4 years, and now is the opportunity to have it implemented. There are entities and interests that are using elections, and so they make a pronouncement that these elections were not free and fair, and therefore this government has to be set aside, and they will install who they want. And you see it in the region. There were attempts in Venezuela to do the same. They did it, you know. So it is the same script.
Chairman of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and Antigua's Prime Minister Gaston Brown is calling on countries to adhere to the UN principles of non-interference in the affairs of other states. Brown made the appeal at a recent signing ceremony with China.
The People's Republic of China believes in the principle of non-interference in the affairs of other states. That is a principle that Antigua and Barbuda holds dear. They believe in mutual respect, which we also hold dear. And they also believe in mutual trust. We have noted that there has been growing mistrust globally among nations, mistrust that continue to create conflicts, even conflicts between China as a great power, an emerging superpower, and the United States. I believe that the relationship between Antigua and Barbuda and the People's Republic of China could be an example for others, which will help to promote global peace and prosperity. In fact, China believes in peaceful coexistence. And if other nations would adopt those policies, I believe that we will have a more peaceful world.
Also at that signing ceremony, Antigua's PM requested a further $20 million for the expansion of UWI's Five Islands campus. The signing was for a grant under the government's affordable housing project worth $11 million and a $250,000 education grant toward a multimedia center at the Five Islands campus. On November 25th, Cubans remembered the legacy of their historic leader, Commander Fidel Castro. President Miguel Diaz-Canel led the commemoration at the University of Havana. Let's have a closer look.
This is how Cuba commemorated the 3rd anniversary of the death of their historic leader. The scenario was full of symbolism, as this is the university where Fidel studied.
Fidel is dearly missed in Latin America. He transited Cuba and became all of Latin America. But as much as we may need him, we continue to reset with an example of Fidel, of Chavez. We continue to transform and continue to look for a better, greater nation.
The first secretary of the Union of Young Communists, Suseli Morfa, recalled that the death of their commander did not mean defeat or pessimism. Citizens know that Fidel continues to stand by their side in every battle.
I think Fidel is present among the youth. You can see it in their enthusiasm, in the way they dress and the way they think. Our youth's minds are much more advanced. Our island is part of the future, a future with a free Cuba under no economic blockade.
This is Fidel's legacy, the infinite presence of a man that, at his last wish, asked that no plazas, streets or monuments be made in his honor.
Fidel is essential. We feel like we need him now. It's mostly because of the current right-wing onset affecting Latin America. We need someone with critical thinking, with left-wing ideas, who pushes for unity and fights for the people. Fidel's legacy is what is needed across Latin America.
We need more Fidel. We need to remember his entire journey, the growth of the revolution. We need to remember his creativity during the revolution.
Like every November since his passing, people across the world remember Fidel's legacy and ideas to help them fight for a new day.
After the break, ministers are leaving office in Malta as the scandal of a journalist's murder boils over. Stay with us.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur. Welcome back. The Spanish Congress is set to pass a controversial digital security bill. The law would allow the government to limit access to websites and even cut internet service in the name of national security. Members of the Catalan and Basque parliaments have been particularly critical as they believe the law is designed to impede pro-independence protests. The spokesperson for Together for Catalonia in the Spanish Congress called the law a grave development.
What's happening is grave. They're trying to find out who's behind Tsunami Democratic. It's a law that's going to affect individual rights. They're beginning the new parliament with a law that's going to reduce basic freedoms. That's a grave development.
Our correspondent in Barcelona, Joan Ortiz, has more.
The digital security decree will pass through the Spanish parliament with PSOE, PP and Ciudadanos supporting it. Podemos are set to abstain, demanding some changes. The parties that are going to reject it are Republic Left of Catalonia and Together for Catalonia. Where is the controversy in this? Well, imagine that Catalonia existed online, an e-state, if you will, that could emit its own identity document and in which citizens could conduct any aspect of necessary bureaucracy online. And that includes voting. This is an idea that exists, and what the government of Pedro Sanchez wants is to prevent it. That's why they're pushing for this law. They also want to prevent access to certain web pages like Tsunami Democratic and cut internet access in the name of state security. The law was proposed at the same time as the sentence against the Catalan political prisoners was made known, a moment in which there were massive pro-independence protests on the streets, which were organized through social media. The Spanish government wants to prevent these protests from being put together on the internet.
Moving on, Malta's tourism minister has quit as a scandal over the 2017 murder of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia continues to escalate. Konrad Mitzi denied any involvement in the case, but his resignation comes as Government Chief of Staff Keith Schembri also stepped down after he was being questioned by the police in connection with the investigation. Caruana Galizia was a well-known investigative journalist in Malta who regularly reported on corruption allegations, including members of the government like Schembri and Mitzi. 13 French soldiers died in Mali's northern region after a helicopter collision during an operation against a militant group. The accident occurred on Monday evening while the soldiers were engaging fighters who staged a series of deadly attacks in recent weeks. An inquiry has been opened into the cause of the mid-air collision. Mali's President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta expressed his sympathies to France and said his country was grateful for the work of the soldiers.
Mali is a grateful country. Mali knows the cost for that country today for sending her children to the Sahel to defend these causes, the causes of peace, anti-terrorism, and the promotion of development and democracy. These are all the things that these young people came here to defend. Their deaths will never leave us. More than that, our empathy with France and the families of these young disappeared is total.
Tanzania's ruling party has won over 99% of seats in local elections boycotted by the opposition. Official results from the Sunday ballot show the Chama Cha Mapinduzi party scoring more than 330,000 local leadership positions, which are highly influential and could set the tone for the 2020 general elections. Chadema, the main opposition party, said earlier this month it would not take part in the vote because of alleged government manipulation and mass disqualification of its candidates. 5 other smaller parties also joined the boycott. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 2 people have been killed after protesters targeted United Nations facilities for the second day. Residents, angered by the recent killings of civilians, stormed UN peacekeeping camps for the second time. They accused them of failing to stop deadly attacks by rebels. So far, the World Health Organization has moved almost 50 staff out of Beni as insecurity grows in the region.
The security situation in Beni has definitely worsened overnight or throughout the last days. What we see is community violence against the security situation. That's very important for us because it's not a violence directed against the Ebola response and it's not a violence directed against WHO. Rollback Malaria Partnership. While 49 were relocated, 71 remain on the spot to this point to assure as good as possible the best or at least the minimum support to the Ebola response.
Hundreds of Palestinians protesting against the United States policy U-turn on Jewish settlements were met by Israeli repression. During the Day of Rage, demonstrations, Israeli soldiers fired tear gas and stun grenades at Palestinians protesting against the occupation of their land. Last week, the Trump administration announced it was abandoning the United States' 4-decade-old position that Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank are inconsistent with international law.
We are here to say that this decision makes the American administration participant with Israel in violating international law. Israeli settlements are illegal by international law, by the decision of the International Court of Justice. And we are here to declare that we will struggle for our rights, for our freedom, to end occupation and to bring down the system of apartheid that Israel has created all over Palestine.
The Arab League has condemned U.S. support for illegal construction of Jewish settlements in Palestinian territory. Leonid Cruz has the details from Egypt.
Una semana después de que el secretario de Estado de los Estados Unidos...
A week after the Secretary of the State of the United States, Mike Pompeo, announced that the White House supports Israeli colonies in Palestine, the Arab League met to discuss the issue with the presence of these foreign ministers of both nations. During the meeting, a statement was issued making it clear that this decision has no legal effect and is a flagrant violation of international law and of Security Council resolutions. The minister also warned that the tendency of the United States administrations to take unilateral decisions pose a danger to the stability of peace and security in the Middle East power, must return to the June 1967 borders. It also speaks of the creation of an independent state of Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital. The Palestinian representative, meanwhile, warned that even if the declaration has no legal effect, it still paved the way of Israel to take harmful measures against the right of the Palestinian people. The Arab League also called on a representative member of the New York Arab Group and the Arab representative of the United Nations Security Council to begin all necessary efforts to be able to comfort this situation.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsa Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.